Hello and welcome to Wait, It Gets Better, the philosophical podcast. Nope, this is just storytelling. No philosophy here. I am, of course, Levi.
I'm Reed.
And I'm Seth.
I almost gave my last name there. People probably know it if they'd spend any time looking at us. Wait, It Gets Better is an improvisational storytelling podcast. Every week, a few of us, me, Reed, and Seth, draw story elements, and then we think of those for the week and then come together and try and form a cohesive and interesting idea. We don't ever say it's an actual story because it never actually gets written, but it is a good idea. Last week we drew story elements, and I think we said what they were on the air, but if not, I'll just say them out right now. I had genre. So for this next story, I'll be coming up with the genre of the story. This is like the mood, how the story unfolds, and things like that. Reed, what did you have?
Beginning scene.
Okay, so he'll just set the scene at the very beginning to say how it's gonna, what's gonna happen. Now, this could happen 100 years before our story is. This could happen literally. Have our heroes or villains in it. But Seth, what did you have?
I had history.
And right, that's pretty self-explanatory, the history of the world, so that we can kind of see the setting. This first episode's really just kind of world building and us starting to get our hands around this project and see what it is. Well, beginning scene and history are all really good. All of ours are really good. Does anyone want to start in particular?
Well, no, beginning scene traditionally starts, but I really want to know where we're going with genre and history to fit the scene I have in mind to fit it to the story, you know? Because if I just were to launch in, you guys might be saying, well, that's not the genre I was planning to.
Well, that's okay. That's the podcast, Reed. I would prefer a harder time putting it together than an easier time, personally.
Okay.
What do you think, Seth?
Yeah. I think normally when someone has beginning scene, it goes first.
All right.
I'm good with it.
Let's hear it, Reed.
Well, Colonel Malcolm Harrison, he was brought forward by some people from the reconnaissance element to show him kind of there was some surprises, put it that way. So he kind of crept to look between some brush on this ridgeline overlooking this small city on a bend of the river. And Malcolm is 52 years old, and he commands a brigade of, call it Tier 2 reservists. Now, he's got guys in their, 40s mostly. And these are guys that served in the Army like back in the day. They have kids that are in frontline service today. And this is a reservist outfit that has been mostly just left on the shelf because, the circumstances on which they would be called up were kind of like, for the last couple of decades, not really thought of as reasonable. But it was kind of fun for the guys to get together for weekend camp. And they had some, their training was still involved, so they would meet, and they had bunkers, camouflaged bunkers where they kept all their equipment, and they serviced their equipment, make sure everything was in operating order. And you got to picture I don't know what, galaxy far, far away, but it was an industrialized society that had faced a couple of generations of terrible warfare. And it was a picture of a society where manned flight was less than 100 years old, where mechanized, transportation with motorized vehicles was very new. And what had happened in the last couple of big wars is that warfare had changed into a whole horrifying, technologically driven killing machine where the casualties of war just went crazy. And what had happened after the last Great War, there was a decade of shock, and there was kind of an uneasy peace between two kind of basic conglomerates of networks of allies. And the whole idea was war is unthinkable. We have to carry out diplomacy from a standpoint of making sure that never happens again.
Are you talking about World War I leading to World War II?
No, I'm talking about the Cold War after World War II.
Gotcha.
And what happened is that one of the sides their system kind of crumbled, and we came into a decade or so of pretty uneasy peace, but it was sort of like people were breathing a sigh of relief. At least we don't have two giant mechanized war machines poised to tee off against each other. Well, there was a number of things that took place, and some leadership changes in one of the big old empires, and there had been several months of furious negotiations and posturing and whatnot, and then people calling up reserves, and all of a sudden war broke out.
Yeah.
And these reservists, they had to make it to camp as best they could. And they had machines that carried very lethal weapons, heavy weapons, artillery, armored carrier machines that carried them to battle with some armored protection, and the old communications had been shut down. One of the things that had taken everybody by surprise was that everybody's electronic countermeasures were much farther along than anybody thought. And so there was a lot of, the fog of war took on kind of a whole new meaning in high-tech, high-speed reality. And these guys, they got together with their stuff, everybody organized, and their plan was to go to a certain hub, which was kind of a communication nexus. And their job as reservists was to provide security for this hub, where a lot of roads came together, bridges, and there was going to be a lot of need for making sure that supplies and communications flowed easily through this bottleneck. And this, what do you do with old, reservists with beer bellies and grandchildren and whatnot, and the less sophisticated equipment? Well, at dawn, overlooking their objective, they realized that things had progressed much more quickly, and it was in enemy hands. And they had no idea where the front lines were. All they saw, they had literally taken up and set up the town the way the Allies were expected to set it up. In other words, here they were, and they had no idea. And they just decided, well, rather than, I guess our job is to deny them what we were supposed to do. So the beginning scene is Colonel Malcolm. He disperses his troops, and they just attack. And it's the first furious. I mean, they're driving down. The bridges have all already been destroyed, and they've been replaced by temporary bridges, and crashing across the bridges into the enemy's logistical gathering points and blowing up supplies. They sent the recon unit ahead to set up an ambush for any oncoming supplies, and they expected to be getting hit from both sides. And he had a brigade of about 4,000 people. It was an understrength brigade, but he had full complement of artillery, heavy armor, and supplies to last a good couple weeks of battle, they thought. So that's the way it starts.
All right. Sounds good. Seth, you want to jump in with your history, or do you guys want to hear the genre?
I'll go ahead and do history real quick.
Okay, let's hear it.
So the history is that after whatever world this is has kind of succumbed to, some kind of downfall, kind of a complete obliteration of what was there before, has kind of rebuilt itself in more of a feudal system.
All right.
With different factions, either like holding on to, previous technologies to the best of their ability, kind of starting out with, either despots or strongmen, gathering, different remnants around them. And then over time, kind of vying for, kind of overlordship of other smaller despots. And by despot, it doesn't mean that they're all like, some kind of crackpot. But, as things would have broken down, families, townships, rallying behind, some form of leader,
right,
which then has
right.
led to, small enclaves here and there to basically set up that, they're now functioning in kind of a vie for, different alliances, being under, different people that hold power in the area, kind of like in some kind of feudal arrangement, as, let's say, smaller lords or townships change alliances, put themselves under, the protectorate of, one despot or the other as, time moves on, and, different powers then are re-solidifying themselves on the world stage.
That's really good. Both of you guys have played into my hand so well. How did this even happen?
We fell for one of the classic blunders.
You started a land war in Asia. So it's really interesting.
We went against Levi with genre on the line.
Yeah, it's really interesting that sometimes things seem to line up really well. So the genre is a political manipulation, aka Deus Damar. So Deus Damar is from the Wheel of Time, and it stands for the game of houses, like the political maneuvering of those people in power, the little hints and things that they pick up from people who talk and say, oh, he said it this way, this is really what he means, right? All those little political maneuverings you've heard about in the French courts, basically every royal court that has ever existed, and now in our political system. That's the genre, right? So what I see is I see the story happening in two ways. You have the kind of upper echelons of how people are maneuvering power back and forth. And then down on the ground, you see the actions, the results of it, right? Yeah. And one of the things I was thinking about for this was the distinction between classes. After this kind of great calamity happened and the world was kind of broken up and kind of is on its way back together, one of the key things that happened was that the military kind of was segregated to only themselves for a number of years, and farmers were kind of segregated to themselves. And basically what began to happen is the development of language changed inside of people. So pretty soon you could tell if someone was a soldier by their slang, by their dialect. Pretty soon you could tell that someone was a farmer by the way he said wheat or harvest. Same thing with blacksmiths, same thing with miners. And then it started to happen between, those who attended court versus those who did not. Those who lived in the mountains versus those who did not. Basically just a total and complete fracturing of language, right? And so what you have is everyone, it drives people excuse me, it drives people to isolation, to only deal with those who speak like them, but it also drives people to not trust anyone who doesn't speak like them, right? And so I can see this kind of furthering your thing you were talking about, Seth, but then also encouraging things like war, because we can't even understand what they say. How do we know if they're asking for peace or not? To the place that some countries use the white flag to symbol surrender, and some countries have started to use the white flag to symbol we will never surrender, right? The base systems of communication are breaking down, not through any magical means, but just through through the twists of fate, the wheel, whatever is so it's even harder for people to communicate with each other. And one of the things that this leads to is it leads to the high language, right? The language of manipulation, the court language, the one made for manipulation and talking in the high courts, walking the marbled steps of the high buildings, the one that is really it's like a language crafted for hiding or for intonating certain things so that you can talk to someone and have a conversation about the weather. But if they're listening for the right intonations, what they're hearing is your latest gossip on the sitting lord or lady, and everyone plays this game. It's not just the high people, certain factions, the street sweepers will say that they don't play it, but they do. Everyone's listening. You have to be very careful about what you say at any given time, especially if you're in a place where it could hurt you, and this is partially because of the feudal system, but partially because of suspicion, the breaking of all bonds, the kind of like who's in charge, we don't know what's going on. So that's the genre. It's a political intrigue with the emphasis on manipulation and kind of house manipulation and people manipulation. But I think it'd be really a good idea to attach real world consequences to each person that we might bring up who participates in this court, so that we can say this is how their words are sort of bearing fruit, as it were, in the world. I promise, ladies and gentlemen, we did not talk beforehand about this. It seems really like we came up with a good idea and then split it into 3 parts, but we did not.
That's pretty funny.
All right, first question. Not who is the hero, but this seems like a giant pile of terribleness all wrapped into a giant bundle. Is there a morally good country? Is there a morally good world? Is it still enough in chaos that some virtuous person can rise to power and save people? What do you guys think this world is going to end up as?
I guess, like, in my opinion, of the way I see it would be like the beginning scene is almost something. I mean, you just were reading the Wheel of Time again, almost like the beginning of that, where you're seeing a clippet of the breaking, right? And then you come into where things are now, right? So, my guess, as far as from, the history idea of it, right? Kind of like Reed said, it could be something similar to our world, where at the Cold War, like, things went hot rather than remained cold for so long on a global scale.
Right.
Right. And then what you have is, all of the different, operatives, the different reserve units, right? If something like that went hot, you'd be looking at, what would they call it? Mutually assured destruction.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. So you have kind of something starts going hot. People start taking action. Most of the overarching governments are now lost. The different, like, undercover operatives, the different generals, the different, things like that start, let's say, operating like different objectives, but eventually find that, like, well, now they aren't reporting to anybody. So what do? Right? They start, holding their ground. I take it like maybe like Reed's group at the beginning, right? Initially operating for, that country. Let's say they take over that town, right? They set up, but then when time comes to, like, report, like, they can't get a hold of their general anymore, right? So at first they're like, okay, we hold this. These were our objectives, but then time moves on and it's like, okay, like, we're getting enough in that, like, nothing really exists anymore. So now what do we do?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So now you have kind of the start of them going, well, like, our town where we came from is destroyed. We no longer, like, have to fight for the, let's say, country that we were in. We've held this ground. We've rallied the people here. Right. So all we can do is continue to kind of defend this area against, the now roaming other bands of brigands.
Right.
And so then now you have the start of a new country.
Because, so I have this kind of picture, right? I have this kind of picture of like a giant UN style building, right? Where every country has their rooms and their offices, but they all come to the world map and they play kind of a great game together, right? They're trading goods, they're talking, but there's smaller maps in other rooms where conflict is happening, right? And these people are detached from this, right? These people are detached from this. And there's certain rulers of certain large areas who feel benevolent towards their people, right? Who don't want their people to die because those people produce X number of exportable products per month, you know? And what happens is sometimes a country or a country represented by the representative who's in this building makes decisions and is able to squash other smaller countries, right? And then those people have to leave, right? Those people are now, they're nothing now. They have no exports. They have no imports. They represent no policy. They've lost the game,
Yeah.
you know? And there's certain countries who are kind of set against them who
That's
are
like that's like you attack them with the blob and you take their cards.
no, exactly.
Yeah.
It's exactly like that. You're talking about risk. Yes.
Yeah.
It's exactly like that. And that's what's happened to this beginning scene group is they were part of a country that were told to go and hold this for some reason. But in the meantime, in the interim, in on transit, that country's supply chain, that country's command line was destroyed and those people were exported out. Those people left the game. You can't participate on the world stage if you don't have X number of GDP. So basically all of the people were just abandoned. Anyone who was left over was abandoned. And so this group of 4,000 people take this town, realize there's no one up the chain, and basically just have to start to become one of these lower roaming countries who don't have a giant gathering place, who have to do their business out in the open. My thought is that happened. That thing that Reed said happened, but it happened years ago. And our hero or main character or something is a child that grew up in that town after these people came and stabilized it and began. And now he is going to, as a representative of this country, to the UN building, to the game center, to the large complex where all the world's information is decided. And, you know what I mean? Where people who are so detached from reality don't even view what's happening as human beings anymore because they've been here for generations now. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. I kind of, in my mind, I'm seeing that, like you were talking about, like the different, like subtle speech part of the game, right? If all of this stuff broke down, which I would like to think that it did, a lot of times the more undercover operatives, right? Most of the people down the chain, right? They never meet each other. Everything's coded, right? And so even the people higher up are secretly getting information from this person, that person.
Yeah.
Right. That's where this, let's say, game comes from. Because in some of those circles, everything is a ruse. Everything is a, whatever.
Yeah, everything's a posturing, a feint, a positioning. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. And so they kind of are behind setting up, much like they would, all these different puppet states to kind of, run their operations through, as half of them, even for maybe many of the years, like, don't even understand that, let's say, country X and country Y aren't a thing anymore. They've just continued to get, intel, right? Prop up this leader, infiltrate this,
right.
Split this up, make this right. So everything to them. And then they've, let's say, after several generations, right, are now that upper class, those that walk the the marble footsteps or the marble
halls, yeah,
right, whatever, the marble halls, right, because they were like really pulling all these strings, right, and so they've now become that upper class, and that's where you have like all of that like code language, is because they've now continued to create operatives, and like take orders from, like, right, because they're just following directives. But now it's I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Where like I'd like to think that anything that was before, like I said, country X, country Y, like none of those really exist. They've just like recreated other things. And sure, there's probably top dogs and, you know, all these other, you know, new countries that, you know, all kind of come about either by, you know, someone kind of holding an area or these
Right.
operatives kind of propping something up and then continuing to kind of, you know, play the operatives against each other, which then if you look historically, you know, why is this country always kind of rivaling this other country? Well, because those were the things propped up by the people from those ones that had fallen before, but just are continuing their operation to
Yeah, I hear you.
take down the other one.
I hear you. I think that's a good idea. But I think that as well, just because we want, yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. I don't know what I was going to say. I think that's a good idea. You can't ever be sure about what is real or not, especially because these countries keep falling and coming again and falling and coming again, that it's really difficult to get like an accurate representation, you know, of, I'd say there's like 3 or 4 large established countries that are always there, right? And everyone, they're too big to fail. They're too big. They've been too big. And you typically, as a smaller up and coming, you know, there's like city states, small countries, large countries, and then this one bigger than a large country is to like be the size of like Germany. And then once you're sort of the size of Germany, then you can start shopping around to one of the 3 big ones to say, hey, I can offer you something that no one else can, but put me under your wing, right? And these 3 countries are the ones who are sort of the big movers and shakers, but they make decisions so slowly and their decisions are so overreaching that you typically don't really ever deal with them. You just start shopping around to them once you've actually sort of succeeded enough. And I think that for our purposes, the story he's only entering in when the city state has turned into it was a city state, and then it's gotten to a small country, and so now he's going to like the outer edges of the what's it called, of the marble floors. So he walks on marble floors, but it's only the outer edges.
The outer court.
Yeah,
the Gentile court.
Yeah.
No. Sorry.
He can't go down and mess with people who have navies or who have air forces because, he doesn't have a navy or an air force. His country has an army, but it's not, he's just not that big yet. And so he's dealing on the outer edges, but there's an edge to him. And I don't want to decide who the hero is right now, because I don't think necessarily that he's the hero, but I think it has to have something to do with the languages. Like maybe he's a savant for learning language. And so he's able to like pick up and acquire languages very easily and therefore able to like bridge gaps really quickly. And that's kind of this country's rise to power, and why it only took like 15 years or so is because he's able to deal directly with the miners, right? Instead of getting a miner whose wife's a baker to talk to the baker, to talk to her friend who's a baker, to talk to her friend who's a soldier. To talk to her husband who's a soldier. And so all the soldiers have to talk to the soldier's wife who's a baker, and then have the baker talk to the baker's friend whose husband is a miner and get a mining deal going. Right?
Yeah.
Instead, he is able to kind of understand this, and so he can just speak directly to the miners and then to the soldiers and then coordinate with the factory workers. And he's able to put these things together and create some form of stability inside of this small burgeoning country, and then is in one way given a prison sentence, being exiled from his country, being invited to walk the marble halls. Right? Because it's not necessarily something you want to leave your home and country and go and be manipulated 24/7.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a way for them to get rid of people who are smart. because just go and run around in circles for the next 10 years trying to get something done for your country and see what you can get done for your country in that time.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah,
But-
I think it's kind of funny. The picture that I had was like a, like part of like the Cold War NATO. That this was a round out brigade for like, that actually if this were Soviet bloc, trying to, and that they had initiated a massive strike, the Russian hordes across the border, and they hadn't counted on this guy. Just came out of the hill country with a complete brigade, fully equipped, trained men that nobody had counted on.
Right.
And like the whole battle had swept on. And here you had in the wake of devastating warfare, you had a complete intact authority structure, a military hierarchy among men who trusted each other and had been, playing weekend warrior for the last 20 years. And then,
Right.
and so they had, and I was just kind of chuckling because like how this fit into this, they just found themselves in this role.
And they weren't ever accounted for.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Because the people that they were told were going to be there, who were on their team, were much more advanced, were much more counted on when it came to the game. And so the reality is maybe whoever walked the marble halls for that country's military said, oh, we don't need this city anymore, pull out. But this smaller brigade, which he never even, it was looked over. It wasn't, it was given no account. And so it was able to kind of move in. And then that entire country that they thought was going to support them just folded up and disappeared.
Yeah.
And then they were able to have this kind of extra special start, a starting bonus. Interesting. Anyone have any cool ideas before we wrap this up? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Wait, It Gets Better, the improvisational storytelling podcast. If you would like to get in contact with us about this story, about another story, about an idea you have, give us a call. Give us an email at waititgetsbettercast@gmail.com. If you would like to send us a message, so you can message us on Twitter or Facebook at @getsbettercast. We will see you guys next week for the next alliteration of the story. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye.